Greetings, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another episode of The Monster's Den. We've got in the house today Mr. Dan Brown, owner and proprietor of the warehouse in Newburgh, New York, and then all the way from Scotland, Mr. Davy Gallagher. Evening, gentlemen. How are you?
Howdy,
Hello, Peter. How you doing? David, how are you?
Doing
Dan,
good.
Pete.
Good to see you both.
All right.
All good.
Figure, kind of wanted to touch on a really cool film from 1946. And who better to talk about that than two guys who I know love older horror films than Dan and Davey. Today, we're going to talk about a film that came out not that long ago on Blu-ray on Kino Lorber, 1946's The Spiral Staircase, directed by Robert Siodmak. Is that how he says his name?
Sod Mac, yeah.
Siodmak, yep. Exactly. A really cool film that I think is worthy of talking about on the channel because there are elements all throughout this movie that really kind of foreshadowed the giallo trend, which we saw like in the 60s and certainly going into the 70s, and then the whole slasher craze that started like the mid late 70s and went all throughout the 80s, and a lot of subtle references to a lot of those two style of movies, and a really great black and white film from the glory days, the early days of horror and thrillers. It's more of like a murder mystery type of film, but again, there are elements of these other type of horror films, which we'll talk about as we go along. So I'm gonna have Davey kind of lead us in here and give us a kind of like a synopsis of this film. And then Dan, I know, has got some things he wants to add too, maybe some trivia stuff. And then we'll kind of talk about where some of these elements that are in this film we would see pop up at a later date. So, Davey, welcome back to the show, and
Thank you.
kind of kick us off here.
So I don't have your fancy Blu-rays, boys. I've only got my DVD copy, but it's a lovely cover. I do love that. So as you said, it's directed by the great Robert Sodmak, who people may know best nowadays for being a great film noir director, and boy, does that show in this film. He directed the likes of The Killers with Burt Lancaster, Crisscross with Burt Lancaster. He also directed a pirate movie with Burt. He seemed to like Burt Lancaster, but he also directed Son of Dracula. So is a little bit of a journeyman in some regards because he was just part of the studio game, but actually a real auteur in that kind of Jacques Tourneur style. And this is, if people haven't heard of it, but they're familiar with Val Lewton's cycle, I'd say this is very much in that kind of vein if people want a really easy reference. But the plot, relatively simple, which is why it does have such influences, but it's very dense if you take it structurally. But plot-wise, we're in 1907 in New England, and a young mute lady is watching a silent film, and there has been a murder upstairs, and we find out that it's the murder of a mentally challenged person, someone who's got the mind of a 10-year-old, a young woman. And it turns out this is the third such murder in this small town in the space of a short period. We travel with the girl and a doctor friend who kind of plays a part and then doesn't, and comes back in, back to a very classic setting for this kind of thing, the big Gothic mansion. And that's something that will very much be a part of, again, the influences of this, but also influences of on this, like the old dark house, for example, was in here.
Say,
yeah.
Yep.
So you've got that creeping in here, and we meet almost like an Agatha Christie, as you said, the kind of whodunit aspect. We meet the suspects of who's it going to be, because it very much sets it up that you are going to know who this is. It's not going to just be someone from left field. It's going to be one of these people, and you get all the tropes of what would become to be tropes of the genre, such as, don't trust anybody, that kind of stuff. And the cad, is he really a cad, or is he just, is he a red herring? You've got the kind of grisly guy that works on the understairs and whatnot, and then there's a cop that comes into it a few times. Is he maybe some? There's enough seeds to suspect everyone. There's enough seeds to say, nah, that's too obvious. But this main character, Helen, played by Dorothy McGuire, again is mute, and all these attacks have been on people with some kind of disability, some kind of impairment, and that's again something that we'll see in different genres going forward in terms of horror, where there's a theme to the killings, isn't there? The household is led by Ethel Barrymore, the great Ethel Barrymore, and she's convalescing, perhaps on death's door. You're never quite sure how sick she is and how much she's kind of putting it on, but she's the kind of matriarch of this reasonably dysfunctional family, where they're kind of, it's a bit like Knives Out, actually. They're kind of half privileged and half kind of chancing their luck. They seem to think they're a bit grander. It's got that, again, quite Gothic thing of there might have been a past there that was a bit grander than the position they now hold in this kind of new society that's changing at the turn of the century, which again is quite a Gothic idea of that kind of ruined past that's coming back. So they have a small staff, and again, the staff can be suspect. There's all sorts of, more like a murder mystery than a horror film. There's all sorts of little clues. And Pete, one of your favourite songs of all time, Brandy, You're a Fine Girl. Well, Brandy, You're a Fine Drink. Every 2 minutes in this, somebody is guzzling brandy. Is absolutely unreal.
And watch out for the disappearing bottle of brandy, right?
Yes. And it's a plot point. Brandy is literally a plot point. We don't want to reveal the end. I think that's because it's a relatively unknown film by mainstream standards. So I don't think we should reveal much more than that, other than to say you will suspect every single character that's involved. But our mute heroine very much sets the template also for the final girl, if you will, if you want to take that forward to the slasher and giallo genre. She's exceptionally likable, again played by Dorothy McGuire, who has a really hard job in this film. And then you have genre favourites popping up, like Elsa Lanchester's in here as the housekeeper, who obviously was the Bride of Frankenstein. Looking much older than she did just 10 years earlier, but she was married to Charles Lawton, so I can imagine they had big dinners in that household. So oh well. And then, as you can imagine, it does give us a conclusion. It gives us, I think, a very satisfactory conclusion, and almost in keeping with where giallo would go, something of a fantastical ending that you have to take a couple of leaps on and go, is that quite possible? But again, we can't go into too much of that just now without spoilers. But it gives you a satisfactory conclusion, and it never turns into, which a lot of kind of very early examples of the genre do, schmaltz at the end. It very much stays true to the Gothic roots of a story and gives you a very satisfactory through line from start to finish, and gives you the resolution that you would get and if this film was made in 1980, never mind 1946. So that's a kind of rough outline of the plot without going into too many.
We definitely don't want to give the ending away, because it is a good ending, I think, and it kind of keeps you guessing. The first time you see it, you're like, all right, you kind of think, well, is it this person? Maybe it's that person. And I, quite frankly, the first time I watched it, it wasn't the person who I suspected it was going to be. And there is a body count in the film. It's not graphic, but everything is implied. You know what's happening to the victims, but you don't actually see anything. And again, like Davey mentioned, like with all the good giallos, like a lot of times you're watching the end of the film and you're like, all right, so that's who the killer is. Now, can you explain why that he or she did what they did? And kind of do that a little bit in this one as well. So, Dan, your take on the film and some.
Well, this is a film where we mentioned about the Val Lewton cycle. I've known about this film for a number of years. I can't recall where I first saw it. I don't think it was released in the horror shock packages on television and so forth. But I may have seen it on Channel 9, which played a lot of RKO films, and that was my first thing. And there's a scene with the eye that has stuck in my mind.
Oh yeah,
all the time. And the thing about this film is that it's a film that film scholars take apart, they analyze it, and there's a lot of nuances in there. And it's a film that gets better every time you watch it, even though you know what's going on, because you start picking up on things and certain nuances, whether it's Robert Siodmak's work or the actors themselves in the plot line. But I felt what happened is being made in 1946, it did well at the box office, but became forgotten because it, not to coin a phrase, it got lost in the shadow of Val Lewton. Because not only was Val Lewton on a ride there at RKO when this film was made, they had just signed Karloff for those last three. So you got Karloff and Val Lewton as the producer. So people saw The Spiral Staircase. And the funny thing about it is that people probably went to that movie saying, I don't want to see those movies about cat people and monsters and this. I'm going to go this one. This is probably a good old murder mystery. And let me tell you, the first 40 seconds of that film, more so than the eye, a theremin has never been used to greater effect until the day the earth stood still, or the Beach Boys with Good Vibrations.
Good Vibrations, yeah.
It's there's a sound of the storm. You hear this theremin slowly getting this eerie music, and she's looking down the spiral staircase in the dark. And that's like a really powerful 40 seconds of film. And now you're going like, oh my God. And then the killer, you only see the killer once in full form until the unveil. And that is in the beginning. And I'll talk about something about later with the influence it's had on people, but that's the only time you see him. And every time after that, the murders occur, you either see everything through his eyes.
His eyes, yep.
You see his physical eye, or you see it from his point of view. And it has that fish lens look. Or then, so that's what you see. And then when the person is murdered, you never see him. And that makes it even creepier than ever. So I guess the people go in there saying, I don't want to watch people about cat people. I don't want to watch about people that walk with zombies. I'm going to go watch this good, wholesome family film. And there's like an eyeball. Half of America never opened the closet again. Like Jaws. You went back in the ocean. There was something about it you just got to be careful about. So it's a great film. As Davy colored most of the things. And Quince. But Davy covered the plot line well. You can't give away too much without giving it away. It's just a film that just gets better with age. I love it. Robert Siodmak has said he directed my favorite film by Universal, Son of Dracula, which I think is the best film they made in the 1940s cycle of horror at that point. So he was a gifted craftsman. Now the other thing we also have Nicholas Musaraka, who was the cinematographer on 4 of Val Lewton's films.
Yep.
So you have that perfect, and Nicholas was a very, very high-end demand cinematographer, over 200 credits to his name, anything from television, but he was right at the helm, and he was a man to be reckoned with. So it had all these elements going. George Brent, America's he was kind of like he was brought into Warner Brothers to be groomed to be Clark Gable's, their version of Clark Gable, but he just didn't have it. He always found himself getting wrapped up with very strong actresses like Betty.
Yeah, Betty Davis in a lot of films.
Ruth Chatterton. And he always got overshadowed. He came up as this run-of-the-mill, quiet, unassuming, handsome leading guy in these like maybe B+, A- movies. And this film is a complete turnaround for him, just his general demeanor. But he, compared to his boring screen persona in certain films, he apparently was like a real man's man. Like, he was a pilot, he raised horses, he got married to 5 hot actresses in like 8 years. I mean, he was just crazy. But
I hope he divorced at least some of them.
I think he did. I think, yeah, they did. Many of them didn't last long. Boy, I'll tell you. But he had a lineup there. It was quite the Super Bowl with him. But nonetheless, you got that. You got Elsa Lanchester. All the characters are, like Davey said, they're all excellent. They chew up the scenery in each one.
And how attractive is Rhonda Fleming in this film?
Oh my God, that's without the red hair and Technicolor.
The queen of Technicolor, yeah.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
in black and white, still phenomenal.
Yeah, she was like maybe barely out of high school when she made this film. It's just one of her earlier films, isn't it? I think so. But she's gorgeous. I mean, Ethel Barrymore just kind of like does more with her eyes and twitch of her mouth. And
yes, she's phenomenal.
Most actors.
Oscar nominated for this as well for a horror film.
Exactly.
Oscar nominated. Yeah.
So it's a film that has many levels. it's easy to come by. It's been out on DVD for many years, and then it's also on, as Peter said, it's been released on Blu-ray recently. Nice job with it, of course, as always, that Kino does. But it is definitely, if you've never seen it, it's something I would highly recommend to see.
Yeah, I think there's lots of elements of this film that when you do watch it, you'd be like, ah, wow, 1946. These are things that we've seen before. So we haven't brought up yet, but the killer, first of all, it's a serial killer. And he's, like Davey mentioned, he's specifically going after women who have some sort of affliction. In fact, they use that term affliction in the film quite a bit. And so obviously we know, and he's stalking already in the very beginning of the film, that scene that you both talked about in the beginning, where she's running back to the house, to the mansion where she works, and it's storming out, and there is a gentleman following her. And that's really, and you see him from behind. And it's the only time, like Dan said, that you see him until the very end of the film. And she obviously, then we learn she has an affliction. And they do explain later in the film why she's mute, why she doesn't talk. And you wait the whole film for that. But the killer wears black gloves.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a serial killer, which again, that's the giallo films and the slasher films, all based on serial killers. They didn't do a lot of serial killer films back in the 30s and 40s. You did have a few, so there's that. But you see him with the gloves numerous times during the film, which is very key because that is a trademark of all the giallo films.
Well, even his hat that he wears, I mean, it could have been a rain slicker and a hat, but
Yeah,
get up looks like blood and black lace.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, did Bava, being a student of film that he was, may have caught it in the theater somewhere, like maybe the late 40s, early 50s, and says, I like that look. You know, it's very possible. You know, you don't know. We didn't go to the movies with them, so but they love to borrow from each other, very liberal.
Yeah, big time. And again, they do a good job here of taking you to all these murders. But like Dan said, you usually see it from the killer's point of view, which is really different. You don't see his hand, don't see the murder weapon. In many cases, he's strangling them, and you just see the victim just screaming and succumbing and then laying there on the floor. Which is kind of, sometimes the suggestion of murder is greater than actually seeing it in all its
yes,
yeah.
yes,
yeah. And I do want to mention too, and Davey brought it up before, the house is another, or mansion, whatever you want to call it, is another character in the film.
yes.
The Old Dark House is a perfect example of where you have a building or a giant house or mansion that takes on these kind of horrific elements and becomes such a big part of the film. That is absolutely the case here too. Whether it's the stairs, the bedrooms, the living area, the basement. Basement plays a big part in the second half of the film. Got to have that. And the weather, the atmosphere, the creepy, the storms and the rain and the wind and all that, all plays a big part in this film, which I think is also what kind of gives it its kind of special feel throughout. And it's
even strange things like the props on Ethel Barrymore's wall that you would think, why did they mention that? It pays off. It pays off.
Well, there's also a prop on the wall, which is a lion's head at one point.
Yeah.
It's kind of a mental thing. You think when you start looking into the psychology of the thing.
And that was right at the bottom of the stairs, wasn't it?
Yes.
Right?
There's a lot of places in this film where there are faces, in places that you wouldn't normally have faces. There are statues looking at you. There are mirrors in inappropriate places to show you someone else's reflection. There are little Gothic figurines. It's a sense of always being watched, just like the killer is always potentially about. We obviously do get the killer POV from one of the best shots in the movie for me, and there are many. That top of the staircase shot while Helen's looking in the mirror and sees herself without the mouth because she's obviously mute, and then you think, oh, that's quite depressing, and you're thinking empathy for her. And then the camera just pulls back and you think suddenly danger for her. It's not just, oh, that poor girl. It's she's in trouble. The killer is now watching her, and we know this.
Yeah.
And you do get the fun tropey stuff of, I'm sure I shut that window. It's wide open, all that kind of stuff. To kind of add a bit of playfulness to it as well. So it's a fun film at the same time, but it is, if you want to read it that way, an incredibly dark take, especially for 1940s.
It is dark and it's very tense. It's very tense. And another scene that comes to mind for me, which again just goes to show you how great Dorothy McGuire played this role. She knows she's being terrorized by the killer, and there's a storm going outside, and there is someone outside that she's trying to cry for help to, and she's banging on the window and trying to break the window, but because the storm is so loud, the person outside doesn't hear or see her, and she can't speak anything. And she tries to make a phone call and she can't talk, right? It's just like, and you feel for her, and she wants to, but she's like, I haven't talked in so long. It's like, I can't do this, right? And she's like, she has to figure out another way to deal with this situation. So she's a very intelligent woman, despite her affliction and her limitations. She, throughout this film, I think, really does a good job of trying to overcome everything that gets thrown at her.
Took some notes on it, just to kind of toss out as and remind myself. But silent cinema obviously is an interesting way to start, because Helen is mute. So it's based on a book. It's based on Ethelina White's novel Some Must Watch, which was set in contemporary times in England. So it would have been sound in the novel. So it was a conscious decision to turn this into a period piece to make it more Gothic, and therefore put it into the silent cinema era. And a mute girl is identifying with silent cinema. That's just lovely storytelling from the very start.
Yeah, I didn't think of
that. Absolutely gorgeous. And Dan, you mentioned the eyeball. That is Robert Siodmak as the eye, because they obviously didn't want you to know who the killer was. So the eye, again, dream logic from Giallo. The eye that you keep seeing is not the eye of the person who eventually is revealed. It's the director himself, doing his kind of Hitchcock cameo, if you like. But that eye shot is straight from Louis Buñuel's on Chien Andalou. The close up in the eye. When if people think that's an obscure film school reference, you've seen it a million times. It's the close up of the eyeball that then gets slipped by the razor blade, and also, then
there's a scene where the mouth is covered.
Yes, but it also uses reflections from the eye, which again would be in a million and one movies coming forward as well. So it is a film about voyeurism as well, which again is very something that Hitchcock would move into. Just as the shot of the staircase at the start is very much like something he would have in Vertigo years later. When Scotty's trying to climb, when Jimmy started trying to climb those damn stairs, and he just can't bring himself to keep going, but he has to push through. That's straight from this. Okay, it's not using the same context, but the same composition, the same shot, and the same threat and menace is all there.
Yeah.
Damn. Oh, the funny thing is the Gothic theme is like, there was always Gothic novels made, whether it be Wuthering Heights, and so forth, and Rebecca, and these were Gothic melodramas or love romances. But there was a glut, like from 44 to 46, when the studio system started slowly crumbling after the war. There was this glut of killer films. In other words, surrounding this film is you've got The Lodger, the remake of Lodger with Laird Cregar. You've got Hangover Square, in which he is he's a serial killer. I can't remember what he killed, but he's a concert pianist. I think he murders all the critics that doesn't like his music, but it doesn't matter. He's deranged, and the end
just like Theatre of Blood years later.
So and then of course before that was Gaslight, and that kind of kicked this all off. Experiment, and watching George Brent again. They did a film in 44 called Experiment Perilous with George Brent in the film, who was also in this, as well as I think in that film was oh my god, Hedy Lamarr. I think it was Hedy Lamarr.
Hedley.
Yeah, Hedy Lamarr. And but there was this glut of Gothic films, and they also had a glut of theremin being used that year, because they used it in The Lost Weekend. They used this film, and they also used it in Spellbound. Alfred Hitchcock. Spellbound.
And Roy Webb did the score for Spellbound and this, so it's the same guy. So it makes perfect sense, absolutely perfect sense.
And
It's funny you bring up The Lost Weekend because I just watched that the other day.
Yeah. There's a lot of brandy in that too for very different reasons.
Yeah. A lot of types of alcohol in that film.
Bottle on the string the rope doesn't work. It usually slips out.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, yeah, this is a great film. It's under I think we could whet enough people's appetites with the stuff we're telling them they've never seen this film because
I'm wondering how many people have seen the various remakes. I don't believe I've seen any of the remakes of this.
I've seen the one with Elizabeth Montgomery, is it? And
where did you see that? That's hard to see.
Lillian Gish plays the. It's been on TV here. It's just been on TV.
What was that? That was like what, 76 or so?
No, it was earlier than that. It was about the time of Bewitched. It was in the 60s because 76 was the one with 75 or so was the one with
Bissett.
Jacqueline Bissett. Exactly.
That's probably the one I'm thinking of. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And then there was the one that Dan mentioned a few weeks ago with Judge Nelson.
Somebody has to give him a job. Yeah, well, the one with Elizabeth Montgomery is so funny you mention that because that is something that no one that I know has ever seen it. There's a lot. It's funny. There's a lot of things that do come out in England on television from the old school, going back years ago. Old films we don't get here. But yeah, that's from '61. That one. That was also made around the time when they did the television version of The Bat with Ellen Hayes.
I haven't seen. Yeah.
You know. But no, and yeah, the 75 I've seen, nothing matches up to the original. I mean, you really, the acting, the cinematographer, the composer, the noirish director of note. I mean, you're not going to get a better mix of elements, in one film for under a very small budget. And it was successful, even though it was successful. And it's warranted, as I said, 3 remakes. So obviously somebody's interested in the storyline.
And it does also have a tremendous sense of fun when it knows that it's maybe gone a little bit too dark. And I think the best example of that is Sarah Allgood playing Nurse Barker.
Yeah.
She's from How Green Is My Valley, great actress. But she gets to be the kind of put upon nurse who's just had enough of this BS. She even has a great relationship with the dog of the household. I mean, she trips over the dog in a kind of fake out, has she been attacked? And she's actually just tripped over the dog and she goes, "Oh, I'm going to beat you."
She blames the dog for everything in this film.
Then she sees the dog's wet and goes, "Well, I'll beat you after I dry you. You'll catch your death of cold. Come here."
But what's interesting is like after she yells at the dog for nothing, then she goes upstairs to take care of Ethel Barrymore. And she gets a tongue lashing from her.
Yes,
that's the whole movie is that.
Oh, and she has a tremendous rapport with her as well, with the whole "I don't need you, get out of my room," and if I leave here, I'm leaving the whole house forever. It's all very heightened, and it's as if they're saying we better put something a bit more OTT in here because it is really dark in places. So we'll toss a kind of, it isn't comedic, it's never played that way, but it's certainly a bit of light relief, and they're playing to the back row in those scenes. Which I really enjoy.
It doesn't like the comedic moments are not necessarily over the top. They're like in Shadow of a Doubt by Hitchcock. Cronin is actually comic relief in that film, being the investigator and doing stuff like this. This one here, the comedic relief comes out of the tension and the relationship of the characters in the building. And to tell everybody that the Gothic mansion they're in, it's not as pristine as Rebecca. Okay, it's not as run down as the Crimson Peak by Guillermo del Toro.
Oh, I love that film.
Somewhere in the middle, but there's something. There's no life in it. It's a dead. Particularly the passing of her husband, who was a very domineering figure, both in the town and in his house, and causes, And then there's the hatred between the brothers is great too. Just the
Yeah, I mean that we haven't even brought that up. So basically, there
Yeah.
are two half brothers, right, who are all living in the house. And then there's another interesting little scenario because there's I guess she's a bookkeeper or a secretary, something like that, who handles all the business affairs, and she works there in the house as well. And that's Rhonda Fleming's character. Both brothers or both half brothers have a thing for her. So there's this little kind of triangle thing going on there.
Who wouldn't want Rhonda Fleming doing your books? I mean, really, come on.
Well, what I love about the way that all the female characters are handled in this film is every single one of them has agency, urgency, and takes responsibility for their own actions. None of them are defined by the men in their life. If they want to leave the situation they're in, they leave the situation they're in. Every single one of them is a strong woman, and every single one of the men, for various reasons, is weak. The police detective isn't there when you need a police detective. The doctor, who you think is going to be a massive part of the film, is not. The brothers, for various reasons, are cads or just kind of spineless. So all the male characters in this film are relatively useless in different ways, whereas every single one of the female characters is absolutely stunning and does exactly what they need to get themselves down to the housekeeper, down to the bookkeeper, I guess. I think she's just been kept around so they can fight over her, to be honest. But when she says I'm leaving, she is intent on leaving.
Yeah.
We'll see how that goes. But even Ethel Barrymore, I mean, you talk about feisty. I mean, you wouldn't put it past her to have shot the husband, would you? I mean, she is just as well. She's not as mobile as she used to be in this film because if she would have been something to reckon with. She's a hell of a woman. And Dorothy McGuire, she's never the helpless damsel in distress. Right. She's always looking for ways to get herself out of this scenario. She's never just reliant on somebody turning up to help her. She's always, how can I do that? What can I do here? She's got the agency, she's got the urgency and the ideas. And unfortunately, her voice is an impairment to doing it. And without spoiling anything, she makes a decision, which again is another very Hitchcock thing, that makes it more difficult for herself to get out of the situation later in the film. But she doesn't know that at the time. She's acting in good faith. But it's a remarkably progressive film in terms of the portrayal of women in film. And I think coming from a novel written by a woman, that's very telling.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, definitely worth checking out. Like I said, if you got a Blu-ray player, you can get the Blu-ray from Kino Lorber, relatively inexpensive, and it looks great. It looks great on Blu-ray. They did a really nice job with the transfer on this. So
and you want to see this in quality because it's got shots that look like they've come from Dr. Caligari, German Expressionism, or F.W. Murnau. There's lots of stuff that looks like it comes from M with the shadow work and things. It's got just a wonderfully creepy vibe to it.
And you both mentioned the Val Lewton films, which I think is a perfect thing to bring up because it definitely looks of that ilk.
Well, that's that scene where you both mentioned where Helen is walking home. How similar is that to the scene where our heroine in Cat People is walking along, and then you get that terrific scare with the bus?
Yep.
Very similar. Very, very similar. It's all done almost in 2D. Like you're watching it in flat. It's a wonderful, wonderful film that, again, people need to take our words on it. And good news, folks, it's on YouTube. You can watch it for absolutely nothing. Right. So
only 83 minutes long. It's not a long film. So
yeah. And actually, the first 14 minutes is the murder in the beginning. You have the theater with the silent film. You meet Kent Smith's character, who was also in The Cat People and Curse of the Cat People, playing as equally exciting a person as he did there. Not less. And then you see some countryside, and that's the first 14 minutes. The next 72 take place in the house, other than a few sequences from outdoors from someone looking outdoors, but it takes place in the house, and the set itself is really well set up. If you notice, it's like a figure eight. You see them go from room to room, the camera work, which he's running around in a panic at one point. So it's once again well crafted and so, yeah, highly recommended. One of my favorites for a long, long time.
It is on YouTube, folks, so no excuse. 82 minutes even, just watch it. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
And let us know what you think.
Good stuff. Yep. So, Davey, I know you have another film you want to kind of recommend here. Talk about briefly before we let everybody go.
Well, it's a series that I'm doing with someone you know, Pete, good buddy Ryan Gallagher. We've on Ryan's channel, Ryan's Final Destination, and we've launched a series called Zero the Hero, where we're looking at films that are 0% on Rotten. Excuse me, I was going to say Rotten Tomatoes. Rotten Tomatoes, as you. So episode 1 is funnily enough. It's Jaws: The Revenge, starring Michael Caine from 1987. So that masterpiece has 0%, and we determine is this worthy of a 0%? We'll see. Episode 2 is also going to be a horror-based film. It's on the remake of One Missed Call from 2008, which. So that's on Ryan's Final Destination. If people want to check it out, just please do, because we're having a blast making them. So yeah,
it's almost like a dyslexic Mystery Science Theater 3000. You're trying to find something good in it.
That's the challenge. Is it worth 0%? And actually, so we found without spoiling this thing, we found with Jaws that we had so much time riffing on it that we ended up kind of loving aspects of it. Like there's now a thing that we've got called the grief dance, because Michael Caine consoles Lorraine Gary's character with the power of dance. It's a wonderfully bad film, folks. So watch the episode, but then watch Jaws: The Revenge. But yeah, so Ryan's Final Destination.
Well, for a fact, Chris Al was a big fan, so.
Chris said it, and Craig watched it. Craig Kaminsky watched the episode, and he enjoyed the Michael Caine impressions that are quite aplenty. I'll tell you that much. But yeah, so thank you for letting me mention that, Pete. It was kind of you.
Got it, no problem. So everybody go and check that out, and let us know what you think of The Spiral Staircase in the comments below. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. Like I said, it's 80 minutes, just over 80 minutes. Go watch it, come back, let us know what you thought of it. It's a really, really great film from the 40s. Again,
yeah,
you love giallo films and you love the early slasher films. A lot of the elements that we've grown to love over the years probably came from this film and a couple others from this time period, but they're all here. Really good stuff. And visit us on the web at www.seaoftranquility.org. We're on Facebook, we're on YouTube, all together.
All the damn time.
So stay tuned for more stuff coming up tomorrow morning. We got Martin Popoff back in the house. Friday morning at the Fun House. We've got the UK Connection on Saturday and Ranking the Albums on Sunday. And then we start the work week all over again with the Hudson Valley Squares. So for Davy Gallagher and Dan Brown, I am Pete Pardo. We'll see you guys real soon here on the Monsters Den. Take care.
Good night.